Hi, and welcome to day 5 of our GDPR 5-day challenge, our final day of the challenge. I hope you all watched the DPIA session yesterday, and it was great to talk with you through your examples of where you got to on your DPIAs in the live workshop at 5 p.m. last night. Just a reminder that tonight's live session, the final live session of this challenge, will be at 4 p.m. Because it's Friday and we all want to finish a bit earlier on a Friday. So we'll be at 4 p.m. for about an hour, maybe slightly less, depending on how many of you are there and any questions that you have. I hope you found this week really useful. Just as a reminder, this week we have covered the introduction to GDPR, we've covered data subject rights, we've covered data breaches and security measures. Yesterday, of course, we covered DPIAs and privacy by design. And today, the final day, we're going to talk a bit about compliance and accountability. So let's make a start on that. Let's make a start on talking about GDPR accountability. And you might say, well, how do we demonstrate compliance? Because there is no formal certification. There's no real formal certification you can take to say, hey, we're 100% GDPR compliant. Some people produce tests, indeed we produce a test ourselves, which you can run if you want to, which can demonstrate your GDPR compliance. But what I mean when I say there isn't a test, there's no industry standard test. However, there are things which are clues to how you're demonstrating compliance. And if you get these right, then you're probably well on the way to being GDPR compliant. And certainly you're not going to get any hassle from the ICO. The first of those, and we talked about this the other day, a lot of this is going to be a refresh on things we've spoken about during the week, is your privacy policy or privacy notice. As I say, it doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it privacy policy or privacy notice. The two names are interchangeable. What is important is that you have a date on it. So you have a date that it's effective from, that it fully says who you are. So your name, your address, your contact details. Because remember, if someone wants to make a data subject access request, they can contact you by email, which most people will, or they can contact you by telephone, which is their choice, or some people will still connect to you and send them their request by snail mail, in the good old postal service. And so you need a postal address on that as well, because all three are methods of contacting you. What else should be in your privacy policy? Well, you should be clear about what data you're processing, what you do with it, and how long you keep it for. In a nutshell, they're the things that you really should be there. If you're uncertain about what else needs to be in there, then go back and view the earlier videos from this week. So that's privacy policy and privacy notice. Great, we've got that. What next then? You need to map your processes, the Register of Processing Activity, or ROPA, as it's known. And you also hear some people talk about this as Article 30 registers or Article 30 compliance. It's really important that you have these. As I said earlier in the week, it's something the ICO is paying more attention to, is have people got a register of their processing activities. And in a nutshell, again, it's what data do you process? What do you do with it? Where do you send it? Where do you keep it? How do you keep it secure? What do you do with it? And why are you processing it? What's the outcome? What's the outcome for you as a business? What's the outcome for the data subject as an individual? Why should they want you to process their data that way? Why should they be happy for you to process that data that way? Or why, even if they're unhappy about you processing that data that way, do you have to process the data that way? It's all about drawing process maps, and often a diagram can make it much, much simpler to explain a data process than words and words and words and words and 20 pages of words. Give me a choice between looking at a one-page diagram or 20 pages of text. I'd rather look at a one-page diagram. I think most people are the same. So if you can do it as a diagram, then do. But obviously, you need the backup text to back it up as well. So that's data processing. So what about data retention schedules then? Again, as I say, this is something that's being paid more and more attention to. And this is saying for each sort of data, so for your customer records, for your staff records, for your training records, for your medical records, how long do you keep them? How do you then destroy them? And how do you know they've been destroyed? And why do you keep them that long? And they're all the things that you need to have in your data retention system. So what data? How long do you keep it for? Where do you keep it? How do you keep it secure? How do you destroy it? How do you prove it's been destroyed? And how long do you keep it? And why? And then a really important document, the data breach register. This may well be blank. It may well just be a set of headings. Can just be a set of headings in a blank Excel spreadsheet. Really doesn't have to be complicated, but you do need to have one. And remember that even the smallest data breach needs to be recorded in data breach register. Even if no other action needs to be taken, you need to record it in a data breach register. So, hey, if you've just stuck 2 invoices in one envelope and you've sent them both to one company, so the other company now knows what another person owes you, potentially you've had a data breach. So just make a note of it in the data breach register. No one's going to get fired for making an entry in the data breach register, but make sure you make an entry in it. Record what happened, how it happened, why it happened, what you did about it. So it's a data breach register. On a similar line, your data subject access request register. So when a data subject makes a data subject access request, so they say, I'd like to know the data you hold about me, or I'd like to see a copy of the emails that you've sent that mention me between the 1st of April last year and today's date. Make sure you make a note of that request in a document, the data subject access request register. Why is that important? So you can record that you did it, that you had a data subject access request, you processed it, you sent them the information. B, it's important because if that person makes another request in the future for the same information, hey, this time you can charge them for it. First time, you can't charge them for it. It has to be totally free. Second time, you can charge them for it. Why not? And if you have someone who persistently makes data subject access requests for the same information, you'll find that once you start charging for it, they become much less keen in actually requesting it. So it makes less work for you. But if you don't have a register of the data subject access requests, how do you know that you did it? How can you prove that they asked for it before? So have a data subject access request register. Quite simple again. Data subject's name, date, time, what did they request, when did you send it to them? How did you send it to them? Doesn't need to be complicated. Can be a lifesaver. So make sure you have a data subject access request register too. Yesterday, of course, we talked about data privacy impact assessments. Make sure you keep a record of them. Make sure you keep a copy of them, actually, because you never know when you might need to produce them in the future. And it's really handy if you have a data breach or something to be able to produce the data privacy impact assessment and say, well, look, we did look at that. We considered that risk. And this is what we did to mitigate it. Or we considered that risk and we considered because of the advantage to the business, we'd still go ahead despite that risk. All might be perfectly valid arguments. But again, make sure you keep a copy of your DPIAs. And most people, if they have a lot of them, I mean, it depends. You might only have 1 or 2, in which case there's no point keeping a register of them and just keep them. But if you've got 50, you might well want to keep a register of your DPIAs so that you can find them again when you need to. And I want just to talk a little bit about GDPR roles, and specifically about, do you or should you have a data protection officer? Okay. If you've got more than 250 employees and or your turnover is more than £234,000, You don't have a choice. You have to have a data protection officer. If you are handling large quantities of sensitive data, you have to have a data protection officer. If those aren't the case, you're a one-man business, you turn over 50 grand a year, you've got 20 customers, you don't need a data protection officer. Why would you waste money on that? Don't need one. But don't call yourself one if you don't need one, because there are legal ramifications with having a data protection officer. And then brings on to, should that data protection officer be internal? Should it be someone you employ? Or should it be external? My preference is always for an external data protection officer. And some of you watching this will say, well, he's bound to say that because that's how he makes his money. And yes, that's true. I can't deny that. Being an external data protection officer makes up a large chunk of our income. But the reason I think it's better is because in all the actions that a DPO takes, whether that's looking at a DPIA, whether that's investigating a data breach, whether that's seeing whether you complied with a data subject access request, DPO has to be able to act independently. And I would argue that it's much easier for that to happen, for that action to be independent, if your data protection officer is external. However, some companies choose to have an internal data protection officer, and that's absolutely fine. Some companies, in fact, two of the companies that we work with, have both. They have an internal data protection officer, a full-time employee who they have as their data protection officer, and they employ us as their external data protection officer. Why? Because we give them a sounding board, if you like. Sometimes if it's a tricky case, they can contact us and say, what do you think? What would you do? So we act as that. And secondly, would be to say that we, certainly in at least one of the cases where this happened, we provide cover for them whilst their internal DPO is on holiday or is sick or any of the other many other reasons why they might not be available. So there can be benefits to having both. The only thing I would say if it is an internal person is the data protection officer cannot be someone who has a substantial number of shares in the business. Now, what does that mean? It varies from business to business, but I would say as a general rule, if your person you're thinking of making data protection officer has more than 5% of the shares in your business, they probably can't be your data protection officer. Again, the reason being that they have to be independent. They have to be independent of thought. And the argument goes that they can't be independent if they've got a shareholding in your business, because after all, the prosperity of your business affects then their individual prosperity. And remember, whether it's DPIA or anything else, you can't fire your internal DPO if you don't agree with them on a GDPR matter. Likewise, if you've got an external DPO, if you're using us, and we say you can't go ahead with something, or we have something we want to raise with the ICO and you don't agree with us, you can't terminate our contract because of that. It's not a valid reason. It's protected in law. And rightly so, in my belief, because, as I say, a DPO has to be independent of thought. And finally, and you probably again expect me to say this, it's the importance of GDPR training. I would really, really, really recommend that all of your team have GDPR training, basic GDPR training, at least once a year. And then more intensive GDPR training if they need it. And with that, I'd like to say that's it for the challenge. Thanks for coming along for the ride. It's been a great week. I've really enjoyed working with all of you. We will be running the GDPR 5-day challenge again, probably in a few months' time. My guess now would be not until the new year, but who knows, we might run another one before Christmas. So if you do see that we're running another one and you'd like to be involved, or you know a colleague or someone in one of your businesses that you work with who'd like to be involved, please put them in touch. In the meantime, if you've got any questions, then you know by now that I'm Keith Budden from Insurity. My email address is keith@insurity.co.uk, or if you've got something urgent, you can always contact me on my mobile 07858 138 218. Once again, thank you for being part of this 5-day challenge. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you've really enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something from the challenge. And hopefully our paths will cross again soon. We will be sending out a feedback form probably sometime next week. So do look out for that, and we'd welcome your feedback. And on that, thank you very much. I'm conscious it's now Friday. So don't forget, we are live at 4:00 this afternoon. If you have any questions about anything at all we covered this week, or anything about GDPR related we've not covered, I'd love to see you there at 4:00 this afternoon. Other than that, bye for now. Have a great weekend, and thank you very much for taking part in the challenge.